Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Becky Hill and this channel is all about chronic illness, arachnoiditis, CSF leak, CSF pressure issues and everything that kind of goes along with that. I decided to make a video this January because it is 9 years now since my accident. I had a ladder fall in January 2015, which started off my journey with a spinal CSF leak and arachnoiditis. And interestingly, at the end of last year in October, I finally had more CSF leak protocol MRIs, which showing that I do still have a spinal fluid leak. My last CSF leak kind of protocol scans, MRIs, were in 2019 that had confirmed the leak. So for a while, actually, since I've been doing this channel, since I think it was 2021, I've talked a lot more about the arachnoiditis, a bit about the spinal fluid leak and my history there, but I wasn't quite sure if I still had the leak. You know, my symptoms are not necessarily these days kind of classic in the sense that they're postural and things like that. They're very, very complicated. And I think it's partly due to the fact that I am 9 years with a spinal fluid leak. So my body's kind of learned to adapt to that. But on top of that, I have the added complication of having arachnoiditis, which I believe and my scans point to that I've had from the start, kind of since my accident, even though at times that might have been made worse by the spinal procedures I had for the spinal fluid leak. But yeah, so it was interesting getting those MRI results back. I mean, it wasn't a surprise because, you know, it seemed likely that I still had the spinal fluid leak. But I think apart from when I'm in a full-blown relapse, and the relapses, I believe, are probably mainly caused by kind of inflammation build-up from the arachnoiditis, because actually when I'm treated with high-dose IV steroids, that kind of brings me back around. So it's not really to do with the leak. But interestingly enough, when I do relapse, my CSF leak symptoms, kind of classic almost CSF leak symptoms, get really, really acute and I can't be upright at all, and it's very postural again, even though I still get kind of headaches lying down and things like that, but I can't be upright, you know, it's the classic kind of pulling in the back of my head and things like that. But when I'm not in a relapse, I can actually be up most of the day. I do lie down towards the end of the day, about 4 or 5 o'clock, but it's not so much that I have a second half of the day headache. It's not like I wake up in the morning and I feel great and then as the day goes on it gets worse. My symptoms are pretty similar and consistent throughout the day. In fact, I wake up normally with a headache. I have headaches during the night, and if I lie down too long, whether that's more high pressure with too much fluid over the night, or whether that's just, you know, the way that my body has changed and my pain sensations have changed over time because of the leak. And then my symptoms are pretty consistent throughout the day. The reason that I lie down later in the day is because I find sitting really hard, even though I'm sitting now. Thankfully, sitting, if I'm on quite a hard chair and my elbows are on something, it seems to take some of the pressure off my spine. And it's my lumbar spine. I think it's very much to do with the arachnoiditis. But I can't relax and sit on sofas. I can't recline back, you know, like that. I have to be flat if I'm kind of lying down and relaxing. So I just get exhausted by the end of the day because most of the day I spend on my feet moving around. I can sit down if I need to, you know, if I go out or I sit to eat or whatever, but you know, like I'm sitting now, but it's not comfortable for me. It's not comfortable. I often find it better to stand actually. But for doing this, it was just easier to kind of film it like this. And for me to kind of read, you know, some of my notes and things like that. So that's why I'm sitting down now. But I wanted to just talk a little bit very quickly about my symptoms of a spinal fluid leak. Now, as I say, it's really, really complicated because I have arachnoiditis as well. I don't know which is which. And also arachnoiditis is known, I mean, arachnoiditis can produce kind of higher pressure symptoms, also have Tarlov cysts that can produce higher pressure symptoms. So there could be an element to which the kind of two offset each other a bit, and that could be why I have so much time upright. I don't know. Maybe my leak is a small leak. The MRI showed that I have fluid from the cervical spine into the thoracic spine. Interestingly, I had CTs done after a thoracic CT scan done after my last kind of MRIs that showed the leak a while later, and that showed I've got loads of micro bone spurs in my thoracic spine. So it's quite possible that one of them, when I fell off the ladder, pierced the dura, but we can't be fully sure because since the arachnoiditis was diagnosed, we stopped proceeding on any more invasive scans and treatments, so things like CT myelograms and blood patches and things like that, because it's just too risky for me with the arachnoiditis. The last time I had invasive procedures, I had a myelogram and then I had a 40 milliliter lumbar blind epidural blood patch, and that was in, I think it was in September 2017, and I was really, really unwell after it. I was already very unwell before it because I was in a relapse that had gone on for months. Like in the May, I had tripped again. I was walking with my daughter and I tripped over the curb and fell, and it brought on a relapse within a few hours. Before that, I could only be upright, a few hours at a time anyway, but I was just that whole summer from the beginning of May until after the myelogram and the blood patch, I was flat pretty much all day, probably about 23 hours a day. And then I went in for the myelogram, the blood patch, and I seizured from the myelogram. I was really, really ill and sick. I had a major seizure in the recovery. And then a week later, I had the blood patch, and the pain was out of this world for both procedures. It was suicidal levels of pain. I mean, I came home and my body was kind of all over the place, and I tried to raise my head because I couldn't lie flat, but then raising my head stretched my spine, and it was just so much pain. And even though over the next few months I did improve, I learned at that time that walking really helped me, and at first I couldn't really walk, but I managed to kind of build that up. And I got to a place where I could be, after a few months, I could be up all day. If I walked and moved around like the whole day, because actually that was a time that lying down, I would get headaches. So at the time we thought, oh great, maybe the blood patch has worked and I'm in high pressure and I'm in recovery, because I could do so much more than I could before that. But it was so much more complicated than that. And looking back now, I see that the arachnoiditis has always been there. The myelogram and blood patch, it may have, they may have improved some of the leak symptoms, but certainly didn't improve the arachnoiditis symptoms. It really flared that. And I just can't risk that again. If I ever did have a CT myelogram or anything, I'd have to have anti-seizure medication. I'd have to have kind of steroids prescribed straight after it. And then there's the thing of, even if you do find the leak, you've got to have invasive procedures. Now it's really, really complicated, because if there is a kind of an issue with high pressure from the arachnoiditis or anything else that brings a kind of, some sort of equilibrium, then if the leak is kind of fixed, then I could go into crazy high pressure. Who knows? And then end up needing a shunt, and then that can make everything worse. There's so many unknowns. These are complete unknowns. It's just theory. There are so many unknowns, but I cannot risk invasive procedures. That could change if I did develop something like superficial siderosis, which we are beginning to monitor. So I am due to have MRIs soon to just have a look for that. So that's an iron buildup kind of in the brain or the nervous system, because of kind of long-term bleeding, and ventral leaks can kind of cause that. So we do need to monitor for that. If I did develop that, then that might be the thing that caused me to look at finding the leak and having treatment for that. But for now, I can't risk the arachnoiditis is more of a risk for me, because that seems to be the thing that causes more kind of debilitation and more issues and more pain and more risk to ending up paralysed or whatever. So so I am not proceeding in that, but knowing which is arachnoiditis and which is the spinal fluid leak, which is spinal fluid flow issues from the arachnoiditis, or, you know, it's so hard to tell. But for me, when I first started on this journey after my fall, the symptoms were very positional. And like I say, when I have a full-blown relapse, which tends to happen at the moment, it's more managed because I'm on long-term steroids and anti-inflammatories and things. It's about once a year that I relapse, and when I do, it's just horrendous. It's horrendous. I go back to being in bed. The pain levels in my lumbar spine, in my neck, in my head, all throughout my spine are just horrendous. My whole body becomes sensitive to touch and pain. It's awful, but it's much more managed. And if you want to hear about how that is managed, then see one of my videos about that. But to talk about my symptoms, it's probably one of my main symptoms that I've always had from the spinal fluid leak is a fuzzy equilibrium. It's that kind of drunk feeling, that dizziness, that not quite being here, that dreaminess. That's never gone over the past 9 years. At times it's improved, it's a bit better than other times. When I relapse, it's terrible. So it's always there though, it's always in the background. Then there's the pain, pressure in my head, pressure around my eyes, pressure at the back of my head, pressure in my spine, up my neck is always stiff and always painful. Moving my neck is hard, bending my neck down and up is really difficult. I talked about sitting is hard, that makes it worse. Anything that kind of stretches my spine basically, and I think that could be partly to do with the arachnoiditis, you know, particularly it seems like I have some mild adhesive arachnoiditis, that there's that kind of pulling in my spine, which the sensation's always there, but it could also be whether the leak opens. I don't know what it is, why sitting and bending my head and moving my neck around, you know, makes things worse, but walking kind of helps. It's just a constant pressure sensation in my head. I have a phonophobia, like noise is really difficult for me, loud noises, beats and things like that. I wear headphones a lot, like kind of earbuds. I have photophobia, I have to wear sunglasses a lot, and especially to flashing lights, fast moving images, anything like that. I'm terrible now with scrolling on my phone or windscreen wipers, or anything that moves in front of me makes me feel really ill, and flashing lights, like we've just had Christmas, are really, really difficult. Concentrating and reading, that's hard. I can do it for a little bit, but I have to really break it up. I've given up generally reading books. Like, I used to love reading books, but I mainly listen to audiobooks. But I have got this short book at the moment, and I've managed like a couple of pages at a time before the pain's just too much, and it just makes me feel sick. So concentrating, I can do maybe about half an hour on the laptop if I stand. But by then the pain is just awful, and I can't concentrate. So I can kind of break that up over time. Traveling is really, really hard. Sitting in the car for any length of time is hard. I can drive, but only a maximum of about 30 minutes. I have flown a couple of times since my accident, well, 3 times, and it's tough for me on flights. Which is interesting because some people with low pressure, which is classic of a spinal fluid leak, find flights can improve their symptoms. My symptoms are terrible. I have such extreme reactions to pressure. So any pressure change, whether I'm kind of going up and down hills or going up on an aeroplane, I just feel so sick. And this last time I flew in the summer, we went to France. It was only an hour-and-a-half flight, but on the way back I was physically sick from the pressure change. It was quite a hard kind of landing, and there was a bit of turbulence, but I never used to be like that. I could fly and without any problem, apart from maybe popping in my ears before my accident, but nowadays it's really tough. Another of my most prominent symptoms is that these days I have a hyperreaction to any intracranial pressure changes. It's often called the Valsalva movements, like kind of coughing, sneezing, straining, kind of raising your voice, lifting, anything that would increase a spinal fluid pressure, or as I said, kind of going in a plane, sends my pressure really quickly. I just get a kind of a burst of pressure. And if I do too much of that, then it takes a while to kind of, you know, bring that pressure down again to a better kind of equilibrium. Sometimes walking can help that, as long as I don't walk too fast. So that is another key symptom. So that's about some of the symptoms. Interestingly, it's after 9 years, it does become normal. It becomes normal to live like this, sadly. But also kind of in some ways, I say sadly because, you know, it's frustrating to have to live like this, but on the other hand, it's kind of good that it becomes normal, because we do spend a lot of time, still I have to grieve my old life, and I still have to grieve who I was, and I have to face daily, realign myself and my perspective to the loss and to the challenges of having this condition and being constantly in pain. Like I said, my symptoms are constant. I always am in pain. I don't think there's ever really a time I'm not in pain. You know, it's always there in the background, in some part of my body and different places at different times. But there is an element to which you do get used to it, and you get used to living like this. A question that people often ask me on my videos is, can I still, or do I still work? And my answer is generally no. I cannot imagine what job I could do, what paid work I could do, because I have to micromanage my symptoms the whole time. It'd be very difficult, very difficult. I think someone with my symptoms, if they were in a job before and they could work very part-time hours and had a lot of flexibility and perhaps could work from home, you know, potentially could do something, but I just find it really hard to know what I could do. But thankfully, you know, there are things I can do, and me and my husband are very involved in our church, as well as him having his own business, which I do sometimes help out with. He also is a pastor at our church, and even though the sad thing for me is I probably would have gone forward and done the training for that like he has and get accredited as a church minister, so that is a loss, and there are many things I can't do. Thankfully, because of our involvement in church and what he does, I can still have a hand in that, and even though it's voluntary, the voluntariness of it means that I can just do what I can do. You know, there are groups I can lead, I can meet up with people pastorally, I do various admin things for the website or social media and things like that. There are things that I do that I can do within my time. Sometimes I'll speak, but I tend to pre-record. So that is a real blessing for me, because it's a way I can continue on with feeling purposeful without that being too much pressure on me. I think if I'd had to continue working as well, it would have put so much pressure on our family, because I really do get to do a lot around the house, and that actually is a blessing for me, because it's very menial and I can move around and I can do stuff, and I need to keep moving around. So that actually works for me. It's in our favour, and it means that my husband can focus on his work and church stuff, and you know, he helps out. He's brilliant, and he does help out if I need him to. But that gives me something to kind of focus on. I've got two teenage girls, so yeah, so that's kind of more what I do work-wise. But one of the things that I wanted to do in this video is to bring people some hope. There is life, and you can live with and alongside these conditions, you know, whether or not you're fixed. So I am not fixed. I am thankful to be quite functional when I'm not in a relapse, but I'm not fixed. And actually the arachnoiditis is a condition that will probably progress and get worse as I get older. And that is not nice, and that is not fun. There are also risks to having a CSF leak long term and not dealing with it. So it's something we've got to kind of keep up with and keep monitoring. But you can live with it, and in fact, there have been times on my journey I was suicidal. I just couldn't. I was so unwell, particularly when I was in full-blown relapses and we didn't know what they were, because I was so unwell. It wasn't just the leak symptom and being flat in bed and I couldn't get up. It was just horrendous, out of this world levels of pain, upright and as time went on. Lying down as well, all day, all night, before we understood the arachnoiditis and how to treat it. But there is hope, and there is a life for you. It may not be the life that you thought you'd have or the life you wanted, but there is a life, and there is a life for you. For those that don't know, in my own case, I had between 4 and 5 years of clear scans before the leak was seen and before the arachnoiditis was seen. Now that was a long time, and that was probably harder on me mentally because I had no proof, as it were, of my condition. Since I have both radiological evidence of both, that has helped me a lot and helped me with doctors somewhat, even though, you know, I had a great CSF leak neurologist before that. So just some pointers in kind of how to both survive, endure and thrive with a long-term spinal fluid leak. For me, a big way of kind of learning to navigate having a CSF leak long-term and the restrictions and the pain and everything else, as well as managing my arachnoiditis symptoms, is finding my own rhythm kind of daily. There's kind of a rhythm I've learned that works for me. You know, at times you can perhaps do a little bit more than your normal rhythm, but I can't do that very much before I get really overwhelmed. So I have to be quite strict at kind of sticking to it. And also my body doesn't let me do something else. But for me, walking is a really important part of my day. Sometimes it's a chore. Today it's freezing. It's a beautiful day, but it's really, really cold, and I've had to wait a bit until the ice, the kind of frost melts, because I just can't risk going out when it's slippy. But it's a beautiful day and it's great to be out. So for me, I try and walk about 10,000 steps a day. Like, I know that's not possible for most people with a spinal fluid leak, but I think because of the mixture of the spinal fluid leak and the arachnoiditis, there's something that they kind of work with one another that allows me to walk that much, and that seems to kind of help with my spinal fluid flow and things. So I tend to stick to kind of that rhythm. But I encourage you, if you can get out, to try and get out, even if it's lying down outside, if you can. Being in the fresh air is really important and does really help. But yeah, we can't all do it. So again, each of us have to find our own way to manage this, and our own way, our own unique way of kind of getting through each day as best we can, whether that's stuck in bed or whether we can get out and do things. It's not easy, but it does become a new normal. You know, it's 9 years now, it does become a new normal. That doesn't mean I don't face the loss and the grief and the frustration of the pain and the frustration of having a fuzzy head the whole time. But there is an element to which you've just got to deal with it, because there is no other option. So you have to find ways to work out what works for you, that kind of balance of life, learning how to manage it and find some beauty along the way. You can learn so much from others, and it is important to get support. The support groups and things I've read on the charity websites and things like that have been really key to me understanding my symptoms and getting diagnosed and things like that. But we are also all different. Our baseline symptoms can be different. Some people with long-term leaks are still stuck in bed. Some people get a bit of time up. Like the year before my arachnoiditis diagnosis, I could kind of be up maybe 2-3 hours at the most, often about 1 hour at a time, before having to go to bed, and it was up, down for the whole year. And there were plenty of other kind of months and years that I was like that. And that was the way it was. Then I was diagnosed with the arachnoiditis and we started on anti-inflammatory treatment with the steroids, and I can be up most of the day. But we are all different. We can have hidden complications like connective tissue disorders, arachnoiditis, scoliosis, or arachnoid blebs, and as time goes on, superficial siderosis, and they can be hidden complications which can change our symptoms. People could have a baseline higher pressure, so the leak could somewhat help them and things like that, so they could be able to have more time out. Some people have fast leaks, some people have slow leaks, some people seem to kind of develop, more spinal fluid over time, which is why they rebound into high pressure. Others don't have that as much. We can't compare. We can learn, but we can't compare, and we are unique. And so as much as please listen and you may learn from my story, we are all unique. And I am not better than someone because I can walk and I can do things, or I can be upright. I'm not worse than someone because I struggle to kind of fly or travel or whatever it is. It's kind of, we're all different, and you need to learn what your own body is and listen into your own body. Another tip is actually what a doctor who learned from my case that went on to deal with my friend who also has a spinal fluid leak for over 6 years. So he dealt with her case after mine, and he had learned a lot from mine and told her that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Once they knew she had a leak showing that it just wasn't going to be simple, and that many years ago, things are even less simple than they are now, even though they're completely not simple now, and there's so much waiting and so many problems, particularly in the NHS. But it is a marathon, and you will burn yourself out like I did by rushing to try and change things too quickly, and becoming frustrated. You have to take time to realise that things have changed, and you need to take time with yourself. Even if you are one of the privileged ones who are fixed, the leaks found and fixed long term, you still need to be patient and kind with yourself long term. It is often life changing, and I have heard of people who it's been life changing for and they only leaked for a matter of months or maybe a year or so, but it's still life changing. Recovery takes time and things like that. But I wanted to also say, we get fixated on getting fixed, understandably, because who wants to stay like this? If there's a possibility that you could get fixed, and there is every possibility with a spinal fluid leak, and they are learning things all the time that could mean that you get fixed. But some do get fixed, and that is wonderful, and recovery can still take time and things like that. But there are many that don't, or go through procedures and they don't, or they do improve and they think that they're healed, but they never quite kind of get back to where they were. But again, I wanted to say there is a life to live even if you don't get fixed. Like, there is a life, and I couldn't see that, and at times when I ended up suicidal and I was so unwell, I couldn't see that. And I need someone to say, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of your life. Like, it's hard. It takes a lot of endurance. It is really, really difficult, but there is a life to live even if you don't get fixed. There is a life to live. Now, I can only tell you 9 years on, I don't know how this is going to look in another 10 years. And I will keep telling my story to kind of show that. But so far, there has been a life to live. I've watched my children grow. They were 7 and 10 when this first happened. They're now 19 and nearly 17. So, I've got to watch them grow, and it's been really hard. And it was so hard for me as a mum. That was one of the biggest losses when this accident first happened, of not being able to be the mum I wanted to be. And there are still losses in that, but there's also been gains. I'm probably around more, I'm more compassionate, I'm probably, sometimes I don't have the energy to fight things so much, so perhaps more chilled out than I was, apart from when I'm in a lot of pain, then I have to withdraw from things more easily. So there are gains to it. I think there have been gains in my marriage, and I think, you know, we've grown closer and grown stronger through it, and gains in my understanding of other people. So it's not all bad. Appreciating life so much more. Symptoms change over time, but we also change over time and learn to adapt more and deal with the symptoms more and manage them. It does become more normal, which, as I say, is both sad and also a relief, because I think there's many days I'm kind of used to living like this, but there's plenty of times where things come in that remind me of what I can't do, and that's where I have to grieve the losses again and learn kind of gratitude and think about what I do have and learn how to move forward. I also believe that, as I said, I have arachnoiditis, and neuroinflammation is a big problem for me. Controlling that's been helpful. I am beginning to think that neuroinflammation, not necessarily arachnoiditis, but perhaps neuroinflammation is more of an issue for more people and longer term leakers. But that's something I hope that they will look into, whether managing the neuroinflammation can help kind of long-term leak symptoms. But who knows? I mean, again, it's probably very different for different people. So finally, I wanted to talk about, well, what about the future? What about the future? I have had to learn to not think too much about the future. I have had to learn more about living in the now. I have to face reality. So I have to face the reality that arachnoiditis could progress, and that's why we're trying to stop progression through treating the flares. I have to think about things like superficial siderosis, because it's quite possible that my leak is ventral, and there's quite a high chance of someone develop superficial siderosis, so we need to monitor for that. And I have had to, it doesn't help me to deny the reality. I have to face the reality, but I also have to try and live in the now. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Currently, I am better than I have been at many other times during my journey, particularly the early years, where we didn't understand the arachnoiditis. I didn't fully understand my symptoms. I had many relapses, and the spinal procedures I had, even though at first blood patches could help, it tended to be quite a complex picture later on of it also flaring the arachnoiditis, so it's complicated. But I have been much more stable apart from the relapses, which are now treated. So that has been a relief for me. But most of all, I wanted to remind people and be a case that living with a spinal CSF leak for 9 years has been so hard. It's been so difficult. It's been an endurance, a marathon. It's every day is a challenge. Every day I spend the whole day managing pain, managing symptoms, and trying to kind of realign my thinking and change my perspective and try and be grateful. And at times it's exhausting, it's hard. But I've also discovered that there are things you learn that are beautiful, that there are things about life that are still beautiful, that there is, you can appreciate beauty that much more, you can appreciate love that much more, you can see a life can become more multicolored in some ways, and there is hope even if you don't get fixed. So that is my video for today. Please do comment below. Tell me if you've been living with a spinal CSF leak for a long time. I'm often trying to work out what symptoms are from arachnoiditis and what are from a spinal fluid leak. So I would be pleased to hear from you. I will say bye for now, and I hope to be back talking to you soon.